Well, hello, everyone. It is that Weems guy. And look at this. We're actually getting a show out 3 weeks in a row. This episode was set up by John Hearn. So thanks, John. I will only pick on you a little bit tonight since you were kind enough to make this introduction and set up the show. Joining us tonight, Mr. Barry Subelsky. How you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I am doing well. We are dodging thunderstorms here in
Yeah,
Northeast
we've
Virginia.
had an unusual amount here in Virginia lately.
It got so bad this weekend that my friends in Oklahoma were calling to check on
Yeah.
me.
I've got
Well,
a friend
people,
lives up in near Gainesville, and he's had trees fall on his
right?
house. Yeah,
I'm about 45 minutes from Gainesville, and apparently it made national news about how bad the weather was here. And it's funny when people from Oklahoma are calling in to check on you because of your weather, you know you're
yeah,
having bad weather.
yeah, for sure.
Yep. If you would tell the audience about yourself.
All right. Well, let's see. I guess I started life wanting to be in the military. Um, Commissioned through ROTC. Fortunate enough to be in some good Army units. Graduated from Ranger School, Airborne School. I went to Vietnam. I served with American Infantry, American Rangers as a platoon leader in a Ranger company for a while. And then I was with the Vietnamese Rangers. Came home and I liked being a soldier, but I didn't really like the Army, big Army. So it took me a long time to figure it out, but I got back into my first love, really law enforcement. Backing up, I was a sheriff's deputy in college,
Yeah.
Washtenaw County, Michigan. In those days, the training was a handbook about 25 pages long.
Yeah.
There was no firearms training. You just got the firearm in 18 rounds. But
Yeah.
I knew I liked law enforcement, so I left the Army and joined the Houston Police Department. And I really enjoyed being a patrol officer. And I got volunteered to go to a Spanish cultural program. I was voluntold, I was the little guy in the shift. You got to send people. So I went to police academy ahead of time. I figured I'd work out, shoot, and attend this training in the afternoon. Well, the FBI was on the firearms range. I sat there watching them, and this guy comes up to me and shakes my hand and says, "You remember me?" And I said, "Honestly, no." He said, "Well, we were in Vietnam together." And he mentioned a couple things, and I connected up. And he said, "You need to join the FBI." So he sent me an application, and I worked there for 21 years. Left right before 911, and was in the National Nuclear Security Agency working in counterterrorism. And I did that for about 6 years, and then I saw opening for a chief of police job that was pretty close to my home in West Virginia. So I applied for it, got the job. I did that for about 6 years, and then fully retired at 66.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, yeah. I had some interesting jobs, some great cases, and believe it or not, the chief of police job was a tougher job. It's a small department. You have a lot to do. Everybody wants to see you.
Yeah.
Every and they don't want to talk to captain. They want to. Yeah, it was a journey.
Oh, I can believe it. 12 years as
Yeah,
chief deputy in a sheriff's office in a rural county.
yeah.
Yeah.
And along the way, I've taken probably 50 firearms courses.
Right.
There, as I told you before we started, we went to Jeff's class, and then I went to the second one about 6 weeks later, and then he just pronounced me an instructor. I mean, we got in the mail brochures for Gunsite listing myself and some other guys as instructors. He never even asked us.
There you go.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it was quite an experience working around him. Was in many ways he had a big influence on me and my
Uh,
firearms training, and he led the way in a lot of stuff. He really did.
Yeah. All right. In our email exchange, you told me that you shot your first gun at about 5, I think you said, and it was
Five or
a
six, yeah,
German
yeah.
Luger.
So my uncle Tom, I grew up in Michigan, Detroit. So my uncle Tom had cabins on the Upper Peninsula.
Mhm.
And, he was a World War One veteran. He had the gas. You could hear his gas pump, and he was a firearms guy.
Yeah.
So we went up there. We would go up there sort of off season, and stay in the cabins. My mom and my aunt were good friends. So he had a German Luger that a World War II vet traded for him for a month. So he had that pistol, and we went out, and I can remember I he had me sit like with my back to a tree, and I shot that Luger. I think that hooked me right there.
Yeah.
Was it?
Uh,
Um,
I fired my first shot when I was 6. I grew up on what had been my grandparents' farm. Um, and my father took me out in the pasture and let me fire my first shot through a Sears Ted Williams 20 gauge, which was a rebranded high standard Flight King. And like I said, that first shot, and I was hooked. Like, this is something I like
that
doing.
was it. Growing up, I had a 22 rifle and a shotgun and so on, and read a lot of Jeff Cooper. Guns and Ammo magazine was probably my favorite magazine growing up.
Oh, yeah. I remember every so often I would talk my mother into letting me buy guns and ammo at the grocery store. Like if I had to go to the store with her when she bought groceries, I would read it and I would read like, the back cover there was always the Jeff Cooper parting shot. And
Yes,
growing up, I had no idea who that was. But I would always flip to the back. Oh, here's this Jeff Cooper guy again, but not having any concept of what it was.
I've always been interested in good, realistic training, and there are some very good guys now that are doing it. But I wasn't all that happy with a lot of the stuff we did. Sometimes they made it so safe as to be ridiculous.
Yeah.
So that's what appealed to me about going to Gunsite was, wow, this is a guy that's going to spend a week with this pistol. It was really quite an experience to go there. I enjoyed it, and then to be made an instructor without you,
Right.
which it felt pretty good. So I would save my overtime in the police department instead of taking cash. You could just take it as time and a half.
Hmm.
And when I had enough time, I'd go out to Gunsite.
There you go.
Yeah, and I met a lot of good people there. Chuck Taylor, Ken Hackathorn. One night when I first met Ken, we were staying with Cooper, and his wife's a great cook. So he had a very cool looking house up there. So we're sitting there talking, and Jeff comes out and he says, time to go to bed at 9 o'clock at night, which in those days, you're in your 30s, that's warming up time. So,
Yeah.
kept talking. Finally, he just cut the generator and the lights went on. We just kept talking. It was quite funny.
All
you
right.
know,
Yeah. You said you were a deputy sheriff for the last couple of years while you were in college up in Michigan.
yeah. The sheriff needed um, help in the summer because he had to have Washtenaw County, Michigan has a lot of small lakes. Michigan's got a whole bunch of lakes. He had to put out the patrol, but that cut his patrols through the county. So he went to the professor of military science school I went to, and asked if there was anybody that they would recommend that would, probably do a pretty good job as a deputy. So they, I don't know, gave him a list of 5 or 6 people, and he hired. And most of my duties, I ended up really working around the university where We were all deputized to Eastern Michigan. The police force there were all deputies. I ended up really working there most of the time, but I got my first taste of the job, and I liked it.
There you go.
It gave me the last 2 years that I was in that university. I was making the money people would raise a family on in those days. So I was able to help pay for the last couple of years and have a decent car.
What university was this?
Eastern Michigan University.
Okay.
It's right outside of Ann Arbor. University of Michigan is. The town's Ypsilanti.
Yeah.
It's about 10 miles down the road. It's a state school.
Mhm.
Uh, One of those schools that I guess, in the 30s, they opened these schools to develop teachers,
Yeah.
because there's expanding
Mhm.
need. And then I think they started as a women's school. And then during World War II, they opened it up
Yeah.
to men. But I was a mediocre student, and in high school, I was kind of bored. And so I really enjoyed college. I studied hard, did okay.
Yeah. My bachelor's degree is from a school with a very similar history. It opened up as a women's teachers college.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then about the same time after World War II, it expanded and started allowing men to come.
yeah. And in those days, when I went to school, there wasn't that big a left wing influence. There were lefties there for sure, but there was a good number of professors that I had fought in World War II,
Mhm.
and male professors, and they were just sort of normal guys. I had one or two there that I thought were a little more to the left than I would have liked in the way they introduced stuff and talked about different things in history. But
Yeah.
overall, it did me well.
I had a history professor that was a very left leaning liberal guy who was a Jewish guy from New York. And that this college was Valdosta State University, right down on the Georgia Florida line. And so he came there, I want to say sometime in the 70s. And he had already started being a thorn in everybody's side and everything early on. He pushed to make them change the sports mascot team from they were the Rebels. And he led the fight that we got to change from having the name as being the Rebels. Um, he told this hilarious story about how he was walking through downtown Valdosta and he was standing in front of a flower shop and somebody yelled out really loudly, "Look, there's that wandering Jew." And he thought he was about to be lynched. And then he realized that the flower that was hanging next to him was a flower that's called the wandering Jew. And it was somebody very excited to see that flower or the plant, whatever it was. And that was one of his favorite stories about that. All right. So from college, you wound up going into the military and
Yep,
said you went to
yep,
Vietnam.
yep. And I wanted to go, so where it happened to be is my own fault. I mean, I did um, want to go, and it was a good experience for me. I was a platoon leader. I mean, um, you're 23 years old and you're responsible for 25, 30 people. It's it it's pretty it's a weight. I mean, you've got a lot to learn very quickly there. So I did all right. I had my share of the, the I had my share of mistakes, but I was able to recover from them. You do the best you can with what you have, and I'd say the Army gave us pretty good preparation, training, and so on. A lot of the firearms training is basically useless. And, if you ever seen an Army film on firearms training those days, they had cement foxholes, and you were in there and you fired. from there at various distances, pop up targets and so on. That's a far cry from walking around in the jungle with an M16 in your hand.
Yeah.
It's kind of worthless. Only two types. I was thinking about this the other day. We did something they called quick kill, which was unsighted fire using BB guns and stuff.
Hmm.
And and then the other thing is when I was in Ranger School in Florida, they had a really good pop-up range there. And it was just the targets popped up on combo. Instructors would pull, the wire and they would pop in front of you as you went down this lane. Probably didn't cost $50 to build that thing, but it was very useful. You had to change magazines when you needed to. And the rest of the training we had was very scripted and it's really more designed to make sure nobody got shot.
Right.
So it wasn't really that realistic. Um, Another odd thing I noticed in Vietnam, so we trained with hand grenades, similar to the kind you see in the movies. You pull and you got the safety lever and you throw it. Well, in Vietnam, they added a second safety feature to that, and that was a little clip that put the lever down, that safety lever down. You had to push that out of the way. I've never seen that. Now, here's the difference. Guys would throw those things and forget to pull the clip. Push the clip out of the way. They wouldn't work. They wouldn't go off. And I often thought about that. We didn't get any training on that. Here you are, you know, in a contest where you're playing for arms and legs, and guys are just doing what they're trained to do, pull the pin throw.
Yeah.
And then you look at police firearms training, it's just a qualification course. It's
Yeah.
not enough realistic training.
Yeah. We stand recruits, cadets in a single spot. So you stand right here. And when we tell you to, you shoot that target right there in front of you and don't you
Yep.
dare move. And then we wonder why their hit rate success is so abysmal when it gets into an actual honest to goodness shooting.
Yeah, very few departments do any really realistic training. The officers that are interested go to John Hearn, to John Murphy, to Works. They pay their own money to learn.
Yep.
And it was shocking to me when I went through the Houston Police Academy. We spent 5 days on the range, and if I remember this right, I think we started shooting 22, nothing less than 22 revolvers. When we switched over to our we all bought we had to buy a 4-inch 66, and we shot 38 wad cutter. I don't know if we ever fired any actual ammunition, the issued stuff in
Yeah.
the train. And that was it. No shoot, no shoot. Just okay, you pass. So when you get your badge, that's it.
Yep.
No more, and there was no more training beyond just qualifying.
Right.
That was it.
Yeah. Because I know it's all a numbers game in the academy, and hopefully, of course, in Georgia we have a regional academy system. Some agencies take their graduates immediately out and put them through more training. Some get handed a map at graduation and told to be on duty that night. Um,
Yes, yeah,
you know, it's far cry. It just depends on which agency you work for.
yes. And I know the FBI does a lot more. They did some of that stuff when I went through in 1980, but they're doing a lot more with automated targets,
Yeah. Uh,
scenario based training. You know.
yeah. One more thing I want to touch on from Vietnam before we get back into the LA stuff.
Okay.
You mentioned that you served with the Vietnam Rangers.
Vietnamese Rangers, correct.
Yeah, Vietnamese. How does that happen? Do you get assigned to them, or it was?
Well, as the U.S. was winding down when I got there, um, the 4th Infantry Division, which was where I was assigned, was being sent home. So I volunteered to go with the Vietnamese Rangers, and I got someone that looked at and actually put me where I wanted to go. So, the Vietnamese Army had Ranger Battalion set up into groups, and they receive specialized training. So you're an advisor, so you're the guy there that aircraft and work with the leaders there, but you're not really in charge. You're an advisor. Let me make a suggestion, and that was that was it. Whether they chose to follow it or not was up to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something else I just want. I wanted to do it, and I wanted to go.
All right. So you come back to the States and you wound up with the Houston Police Department. Now, was that just where you mustered out of the Army? How'd you pick Houston or?
Yeah. So, along my way in the Army, I was an aide de camp to a 3-star general, #2 commander, deputy commander of U.S. Forces. And up until that time, I had never served in the Army above an infantry brigade. Well, I never really saw what everybody did. So in that headquarters, I saw all these staff officers, many of them running around. Just didn't appeal to them, frankly. I looked at a few of these majors and captains. I thought, man, I just can't do this. So I remember I just decided I needed to get out. I just didn't see, I was a middle of the road officer. I wasn't on a path, anybody's special path. And I thought, I just don't think I want to do this. I just couldn't be a staff officer here in one of these jobs. So, um, and I looked around when I started thinking about getting out. Houston was at that time 3,000 officers short by some metric that ICP came up with, the city size of the city. But Houston's big city is like 600 plus square miles. So that's why I went there. And their police academy was very good. It was um, rigid. I mean, sometimes if we took a test every Monday morning, and there were repercussions if we didn't all pass it. We had to pass it. So if somebody failed, we got some extra of something. Well, but sometimes the instructors also would decide on their own that we should have had a higher average. So so what they had us do, they called it smart marching. So our police academy was in downtown Houston, and I went there. So we would march through the streets of Houston in that heat for our lunch hour. That was to make us smarter. It wasn't. I thought the instructor was really pretty good there, and um, we did have some practical exercises. We actually, made like an arrest and walked it through the courts and we get warrants. The ADAs played along with us, and then we had a little court and stuff like that. It was pretty good. They brought in good speakers, and we had to sit in those classrooms like that. We're in an officer candidate school, back straight, first 4 inches of the chair. We wore ties, long sleeves in the summer of heat in Houston. But when a guest instructor came in, he took over the class. They'd say, "Okay, loosen your ties, unbutton your sleeves, relax in your chair." So it was always, as we would look forward to it. Oh, here's the FBI sex crime. So that's 4 hours of being comfortable. So
Yeah.
I enjoyed my time there in Houston. I've been happy to stay there, to tell you the truth. I liked patrol. I like, what I like is no day was the same. As you know, the calls can be different, and it just kept my interest going. I like working. I had a good partner, and it seemed to me our shifts would end literally as in most cases we were very busy in the city where we were. We were in a high crime area, but it's very busy. So it's always something to do.
Yeah.
And it was a heck
Yeah.
of a lot easier than being in the army because you didn't work nearly the hours you did in the army.
Yeah. How long did you work with Houston?
About 3 years, maybe a little more. Like I said, I ran into this guy and he hooked me up with the paperwork. And I took the test and I passed it. And it took about a year to get in. They do a bit of background stuff and interviews. And then I went back there for about a year. And then they sent me to Cincinnati, Ohio to a foreman office out in the middle of the rural part of Ohio. That was really a lot of fun. There are four of us there, and you have your slice of the pie and you just work. You're not really supervised. Yeah. So that was good. I had to work civil rights and maximum, a minimum, and then I think it's the maximum in a low security prison, super max there. I, I, what I found interesting there is I can interview all these criminals with their, so-called violations and different things. I really learned how to deal with liars and how to pay attention, I guess, to the details of what stuff. But these guys could take you on quite a trail. For a while, you'd be thinking, I'm about to crack the case here. Then you realize, wait, oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was good. Um, it was good for me as a new agent, really, to do something. So,
Yeah. So when was it that your connection with Gunsight started? Was that while you were with Houston or the
that
FBI? Or
started yeah, right after I got out of, well, I started going right after I got out of the police academy. I started
okay.
going back with Jeff. And then he came to Houston. Excuse me. He came to Houston a couple times a year. He started sort of doing the mobile thing, very limited ways. And Houston is a big Texas firearm, And so there was a big audience there. And so he would come there and have maybe 30, 40 students in a class. And then I help him with that. That was a lot of fun. What I liked, the thing with Jeff his system. So he took somebody from 5 days and brought them up to a reasonable standard of being able to draw and hit a target. We went out to 25 yards, but we mostly spent our time at 5, 10, 50. And he taught you how to do that, people to do that. Now they were motivated because they paid money for it.
Right.
But I, I mean, sometimes there'd be a guy there with it, like maybe a dentist or a doctor with his wife and daughter and stuff. And they maybe never touched a gun before, never touched it. And some of them shot really well at the end of that week. And I thought to myself, police departments developed, maybe used his curriculum, they might have a little more success. He's definitely a leader in all this stuff. There's no doubt about that.
So what time frame we talking here? Early 70s?
Late 70s. I think I went to Gunsite in 77,
Okay.
76. Yeah. And because I got out of the Army in 78.
Right. Okay.
So, um, but I enjoyed very much. Like I said, Gunsite was just a lot of fun for me after that. And he had he had the square range, the Tonga, the ditch. You know what I'm talking about? I don't know if you've ever been there. And then he had the shooting house. The shooting house was something none of us had ever seen. That was an incredible facility based on the time frame where nobody had a live fire house that anybody could almost 360.
Yeah. All right, we've already talked about how the military's firearms training was very, let's just say, did not match up to the reality of what you would be doing in the army.
No,
And then the same thing when you went through the police academy. So then you find yourself in the FBI. Was it better? Was the FBI's firearms training more aligned with what you were going to see, or
I think so. Yeah. Well, first off, we spent a heck of a lot more time shooting the pistol and the shotgun. We had a long gun then, and we shot, the M16. But when I went through the academy, the M16 was not a primary weapon available to Aegis. We didn't qualify, but we spent 12 hours a week, almost every week, in 4-hour sessions on the range. And a lot of it was the typical EPC kind of, course, 5 yards, 10 yards, so on and so forth. But in those days, we had a 3-inch Model 15. And we started at the 60-yard line, run to the 50. And so you had to get a good number of those rounds at the 50 in order to qualify. You couldn't just waste those rounds. You know what I mean? You had to do
yeah,
it. And it and if you when we came to qualification day, if you did not qualify, you had 2 shots at that. You did not qualify at lunchtime, you're done. They would take you out, give you a paycheck, and fly home. So, which I thought was reasonable because after all, get all that training, you know, the stress of doing this with the for we did a lot of still did some like unsighted fire, drawing and shooting at close range. Um, we did some scenario based training, but we didn't do any live fire blanks or anything like that. But we did, shoot no shoot scenarios and rest problems where the instructor developed. But mostly it was very similar to police training. But we did a lot of it. We did a lot of shooting,
yeah,
um, and so I think even people there were ladies in my class and guys that were fired. They were able to qualify at the end of that time frame. There were 3 or 4 other cops, I think, in the class. Another former Army guy, and the rest of them were hodgepodge of lawyers, citizens, like a typical police job. Not everybody probably was suited for it, but most of them knew what they signed up for. The academy was pretty good. Food was okay. For me, it was a vacation from real life. I left my wife and son in Texas. Here I am. Food is there. I'm enjoying. I'm getting training in something I enjoy. There's a gym here. There's a fantastic law enforcement library there that has one of everything. They had free movies on the weekend. I brought movies from the Post Theater down there. You didn't have to leave the place. So for me, it was like, hey, this is great. My wife's there dealing with work and the kid, and I'm, in little fantasy land here. Well, what do I have to do? Study.
yeah,
The classes were not um, unfair. They were like freshman college. Their lecture format, good instructors. Um, some of the stuff, the legal uh, instructor went over with us. I mean, I still remember it. And then we had, particularly with legal, we had all the tests were based on a scenario. You get a warrant, why? I thought it was very good. And some of the people in that class had been, that's their whole life's ambition was to be an FBI agent. I remember my roommate was lined up to be given our credentials after we were sworn in. He was emotional, crying. He was so happy. He had been waiting for this day like 100 years ago, it seemed like to him.
Yeah.
So, um, and I'm still friends with a lot of people that I, both instructors and people there. I worked with a variety of stuff in the FBI. You know, what we would call street crime and violent crime for a while. And
Now, once you got established in the field with the FBI, and you were also simultaneously teaching at Gunsite, did they allow you to bring any of that?
I couldn't teach a gun site. Once I got in the FBI, I
Okay.
had to stop that. Yeah, you
Okay.
can't have an outside job.
Okay. So while you were
Yeah,
teaching at Gunsite with Houston, but not while you were also with the FBI.
right. Once I got in the FBI, I stopped
Okay.
there. Yeah.
Did you become an instructor and teach within the FBI?
Yes, I became a firearms instructor in 1982, 83, something like that. And then I was the SWAT team leader in the Washington field office. So we did a lot of, I was able to develop my own training program there. So I did a lot of shoot, kill, shoot training in vehicles, a lot of live fire, lots of live fire we were able to do because we had a shooting house there. We were able to get to some of the military units to train with them, use their facilities. We we had a really good mix of training and time and a budget to do it.
That's the big thing right there is budget to do stuff.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm fortunate. In that 10 years, I had very different. Every couple of years, you get a new special agent in charge, other assistant. Um, I didn't have any that didn't see the value.
Right.
So nobody really. I like to think. I, I tell people this: that if you're swapping there, about 25% of your time spent training your boss, developing, their confidence in the team. Um, I would always take video and bounce into a supervisor's office, say, "Give me 5 minutes," and just show them, what their people were doing. I had a slideshow lecture there on our tactics, explain to the supervisors, this is what we can do, and we can do it well. This is stuff that we can't do. We're not Delta Force.
Yeah.
We can do these things well, and I think that's an important part of the job because there are always people who think, this is want to do something else. So I never really had that. I had good bosses. And then when I was the chief of police, I helped put together a county-wide squad. We all could contribute 2 or 3 guys, but we could deal the whole team. So same thing there. You had to convince the chiefs and the sheriff, this is what you need. That's an important part of the team. We made ourselves available to the squads in the Washington field office. So we made an effort. If we went out and made an arrest for them, we didn't just leave. We'd stay and say, can we help you here? Guard your cars, gather evidence, whatever you need us to do, we'll stay here. So, but when I was there, we had pretty good support, and we had a lot of use because we we knew our role, and we we didn't try to step on a case agent. The last thing a guy wants to do is have someone else take his job. You know what I mean? You work the case, you want to put the cuffs on it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're dealing with someone who has $300,000-400,000 worth of money. You don't, you know, you want more people there that control that if it goes bad. So once the case agents saw how we worked, we didn't have any problem. We didn't have to fight that.
All right. Now, you said in your email that you retired 1 week before 9/11.
Yeah, I retired on September 3rd. Yeah. And on September 10th, so what had happened, I had gotten promoted. I was in a unit. I had the special events management unit. So in the joint terrorism task force, all the money came from my unit. So our job would be to support like the Atlanta Olympics, for example. We would help put together that from the headquarters perspective and the money for it. More importantly, the money for it, and we also had the responsibility of forming and supporting joint terrorism task force. We had Congress went for that in a big way, so we had what they called no-year money. I mean, we didn't lose money at the end of the year. Building if we didn't have some. So I was doing that job, and I had occasionally I would have to go to the White House to meetings. Uh, One particular meeting I was at, this retired Air Force general introduced himself to me. He asked me if I was looking for a job. And I hadn't really thought about it, but I was getting towards retirement age. And so he said, look, if you're interested, I'm running the emergency management. I'd like you maybe to apply for a job. Well, unbeknownst to me, the people that worked for him, the guys I had been dealing with and special events things. The next thing you know, I'm getting emails from guys saying, "Hey, Boomer wants to hire you, man." So I said, you know what? I really need to be looking beyond this job. I love being an agent. I need to look at the future. So it took about a year for them. They had to get before the war on terrorism, like they wouldn't, you can't rehire. I was a GS-15, so you can't really rehire me. You had to, yeah, that took about a year. So it came in right before 9/11. So I retired on the 10th. I took my oath of office and an essay. And the next day, I remember I was getting my office supplies, and we go, a plane hit the Pentagon. And I think, like most of us, we thought, hit the World Trade Center. Most of us thought, that's some idiot in a Piper Cub, you know. And we didn't think anything of it. Secretary and I, we go upstairs. As we got upstairs, we saw a second plane. And my good friend, Paul Evanco, retired Navy SEAL, he looked at me and he said, "Partner, we are under attack." And I'm sitting there thinking, what am I supposed to do? I have one day here and I have office supplies. So literally all I could do was answer the phone and say, who can deal with this? Then I would hand him the phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. It was pretty you know, I think like most Americans, none of us quite believe what's happening. You know what I mean? It was like surreal.
Yeah.
And it took a while to for things to settle down. And cars were um, hard to rent. So a friend of mine was the special agent in charge of Boston Field Office. He was at FBI headquarters. Well, the planes are grounded. The only thing he could rent to get back to Boston was a dump truck. And that's what he drove back from Washington to Boston. People were trapped all over the place.
Yeah.
So Um, and then we began to ramp up what we do, having the ability to serve for nuclear material and stuff. And we supported New York. There was a lot of stuff went in that pile. Think about it, how many doctors' offices were there with some kind of machines with radioactive material in them,
Yeah.
dentist offices. So that was part of the deal. New York was awful to go up during all of that.
How long did you stay with that agency?
6 years.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, and it was okay. I was happy working there, but I had a long commute. I moved to
Uh,
West Virginia, and at that time I was staying with my mother-in-law. I used to tell everybody that I lived with my mother-in-law. Dated my wife. I would come in Bethesda and stay at her house for 4 or 5 nights, and then go home on the weekend.
yeah.
But that was getting to me after a while. I was getting wearing me down. I wouldn't have moved if I'd have known a war was going to start.
Right.
And so when I saw the job opening for chief of police, I read in the newspaper, it was a DEA agent. So without thinking, I just said, well, I'll apply for this. So I just sent a resume into the mayor, and I didn't hear anything for a long time. I just forgot about it. And I got this call out of the middle of like on in for an interview. The mayor was a terrific lady, and she offered me the job. And I took it. And my wife used to say that she didn't see me with a spring in my step until I got back in that type of job.
There you go. And how long did you stay as chief there?
I was there 6 years to the day,
Okay.
6 years to the day. And I, again, I was getting older, and I had met a lot of goals. I said, I think it's
Mm.
time to mosey on out of here and have some fun with whatever time's left.
I'm certain there was a startling difference in the level of resources in a town in West Virginia versus what you were used to.
Oh yeah, yeah, but we had a good budget, and we had good equipment. Um, the officers were really pretty good. Like everywhere you work, there may be people you're disappointed in, but for the most part, I think they did a pretty damn good job.
Yeah.
Charlestown, West Virginia is where I was a chief, and the citizens there, by and large, wanted a responsible police.
Yeah.
So we never had, when I was there, we didn't have any budgetary issues. I mean, of course, we'd like to charge every year. But I did significantly more firearms training for these cops than they'd ever seen before. I brought in outside trainers. I brought in retired FBI people that mentored me. Brought in a pretty well known trainer there, Bob Tauber, The Rock. Lots of police knew him. He was a SWAT trainer. He wouldn't take any money. Would not take any money from me. I brought in John Hall, who was the head of the legal training at the academy. He was an excellent lecturer. I brought in to teach for me. He wouldn't take any money from me. They just did it on the state of my house. That was
Yeah.
it. And I brought in trainers rather than send guys off to the police academy or to in-service training somewhere. I figured I'd rather pay an instructor from the city, and I don't lose the manpower. You know what I mean? I don't have them 5 hours away driving home if we have a crisis of some kind.
Right.
So I tried to bring in good trainers and people, um, not just with firearms related stuff. I brought a guy in to talk about that investigated that Russian significant number of hostages taken. Uh, I can't, my mind clouded on it now. A lot of people. So I brought a guy in to speak on that, and in a way to open this up to all law enforcement. You know, and while I was there, I was obviously a firearms trainer. Some of the people I worked with in the military, significant training company, it's by a friend of mine. They came in and trained the SWAT team, Sergeant Nickel,
There you go.
on their dime, by the way, not mine. But so that was good. So I enjoyed it. We had cameras in the cars, which made me very unpopular when I put the cars. But I think the guys quickly realized, I think like they are with body cameras, it's making the cops look good.
Yep.
You see the most unreasonable people. You see the cops going, "I'm begging you to get out of the car," Yeah. And the people refuse to do it. And you're watching it. Come on now, get out of the car. So, but at first they felt like other customers.
Yeah, we implemented body cameras, and I got to tell you, as chief, I loved them
Yeah,
because they exonerated our deputies of accusations of wrongdoing by far more than they actually proved an
yeah,
accusation. And there was this big push here in my state of every interaction needs to be recorded, all this kind of stuff. The bill didn't make it through. Um, but some of the same people who were pushing for, we got to put cameras on every cop so we'll catch them and all this stuff, now are coming around because it actually backs up the cops.
right,
Oh, these
exactly.
these cameras are
Yeah,
an invasion of privacy.
exactly. Yeah, a number of times, countless times, did I find. Sometimes I would invite these people to watch their interaction, and they'd be quite stunned. I one particular incident here, a woman, I was in my office, and one of the officers called me and said, "Chief, there's a lady coming over the office. It's really dangerous." He said, she paid her ticket. I don't, but this woman came over and she was outraged about this ticket. And everything was unfair and the officer was a jerk and all that stuff. That's one thing, giving information. And so I looked at the video. This looked like a police academy training video. I mean, the guy introduced himself and told her what the violation was. And she was very arrogant, and he didn't have a proof of insurance. And the officer says, "Well, man, I'm going to cite you for it, but if you bring me into the office in 5 days, okay." And I already told you. I mean, he was perfect. And so I, I called her up and I said, "Would you like to see the video?" She immediately changed her whole tone. She goes, "Oh, you have a video?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Did you bring your husband and some popcorn and watch this video?" Um, no, I think I just was a little upset at that, you know. But the most interesting one that I had, an officer in a brand new car, so it's got the most up to date lighting system that we could possibly put in it. It was winter. It was cold in the daytime. He gets behind this van that's speeding, and he flips on his lights and siren, and this car goes. And he didn't call it in as a chase, but he was getting ready. I mean, the guy wasn't speeding, particularly. He wasn't trying to evade him. So this car had the driver and his whole family, two or three aunts and uncles. He was from India, Indiana,
Hmm.
and so um, the officer wrote him a ticket, and you can hear him on the radio, I mean, on the body recorder. The ticket, another car comes up, and the other officer asks him, "Are you okay?" He said, "Well, I thought you were going to call as soon as a face." And the officer said, "Well, I was thinking about it." He said, "I was thinking about phoning the guy out because it was so unusual." But he said, "So he's got his family there and his kids." So that was like a Friday. I started getting I get a call from the town manager saying, "You got to stop these faxes." But one of these ladies was sending nonstop faxes in, not just City Hall, but into the governor's office about how this officer mistreated this guy, and awful. This is a bad officer, and um, they were, we were getting ready. I mean, I called this woman. I said, "You're on the verge of getting in trouble for telephone harassment here."
Yeah.
So I got the video, and then I invited these people, and they came in on a Saturday. So this is like a guy and his aunts and his wife, and they're all upset. And they showed me, each of them was carrying a picture of Jesus in their wall. And, we're honest people. Okay. I said, let's look at the video. And I went through what they said in this fact. So I would get to a point and say, okay, which one of you said that the officer uh, did the following? You raised their hand. I'd say, okay, remember that. So I go through the whole thing. So, okay, now we're going to watch the video. I said, whenever you see one of these incidents pop up, raise your hand, bring the officer in here. He's sitting in the back, and I'll fire him right in front of you. They're like, oh, we don't want you to fire him, but he needs. No, no, we don't tolerate that here. Well, they
Yeah.
convinced themselves all this happened.
Yep.
They watched that video and they were stunned. They were stunned.
Yep.
And I said, folks, this did not happen. This happened in your mind and you convinced yourself.
Yep.
I said, the fact is, and this guy's story was that, his kids were watching one of those black and white Japanese monster movies, where the
Hmm.
monsters are and they were yelling and screaming and sirens, and he didn't hear the police siren. That was his story. So, okay, but the officer didn't do anything. And they were absolutely shocked. They could not believe when I've showed videos over and over, a completely different recollection. That's why I'm all for the body
Yeah.
thing going, I think.
In Georgia, we have what's called the open records law, which
Yeah.
on the federal would be the Federal Freedom of Information Act, the state equivalent. I got an open records request from my father wanting to know, and this was the I can't remember the exact words now, but it was basically like, I want to know why your deputies beat my son. Like that was the request. I'm like, well, okay, let me let me go look into
Yeah.
this, and I start pulling, you know, the incident reports, interviewing the deputies, and everything else. And it turns out that the boy had been passed out at the parking lot of an apartment complex. A passerby, like a resident there, is like wakes him up. Hey man, you okay? You okay? And he charges into these other girls' apartments and like passes out on their couch, is throwing a fit. He's already covered in blood, where apparently he fell and busted his face. And that's when 911 got called. And deputies get there and they treat him medically until the ambulance gets there and the ambulance takes him to the hospital. Well, when his parents get the call from the hospital and they show up there and their son's all bloody and everything else, oh, the cops beat me. And I
Yeah.
provided all this documentation to the father. And I gotta say, to his credit, he actually wrote a formal apology and sent it back and asked me to give it to the deputies that he had accused of wrongdoing without knowing the facts.
When I was a police officer, the Carter was president,
Mhm.
his U.S. Attorney's office there in Texas was aflame with complaints about police misconduct. They would actually call people up. If there was a story in the newspaper about it, they would call the guy, and then maybe the guy was arrested, and said, maybe you need to come in to make a complaint. So what my partner and I started doing, we bought a Polaroid, because when you bring a guy in, particularly drunk, he doesn't really know what's happened to him. He might get tuned up in the jail by other inmates. But the only thing he knows, he's just got my name on the book.
Yeah.
So that's where everything would always start. So we would take pictures of everybody we arrested, standing right in front of the jail, labeled the back when we took the picture. That saved us 2 or 3 times because an investigator would come down and see us. We'd show them the video picture. That's what he looked like when he went to jail. And that
Yeah.
ended. But we took pictures because of that.
Yeah.
And as an agent, I had to investigate a civil rights complaint. This guy was I'm now older than this guy was. This guy was in the early 70s, and he was bruised all over. And he came to the FBI office in Cincinnati with his attorney and everything. So they called me up and said, "Hey, you better go out and look at this. This guy looks like he's beaten up." So this was a state police. So and this and again in this part of Ohio, hate cops, average citizens, just normal people. So this older guy was drinking in a bar. He was loaded. He came out of the bar. He threw up as he got into his truck, and I guess there was a state trooper. So as soon as the guy moved out on the roadway, we could come over. And so this is in view of the people in the bar. So the trooper gets out of his car, and the troopers did not have cages in their car. So the trooper gets out of the car, and he opens the door of this truck, and this old guy steps out, takes a swing out, totally misses him and falls down. So the officer cuffs him, sticks him in the right front seat to start the investigation. This guy kicks the windshield out of the trooper's car. Strong guy, breaks the windshield. So the trooper drags him out of the car. Doesn't hit him or anything, just drags him out of the car. Then he radios for assistance. And a detective from the sheriff's department, puts him in the back of his car, no cage. The guy kicks him in the side of the face. In the jail, this is an old jail. They had gas heaters in each of these sort of big cells, and they were on a flexible hose. This old guy picks the heater up and slams it against the bars of the jail and fights for the deputy. You can see why he's all bruised up. So as I started to investigate this, citizens tell me, "Oh yeah, we watched this. They tell me what happened. I haven't talked to the trooper at all." And then I go to the jail, and the inmates in the jail are like, "Yeah, I took 5 or 6 of these guys, they pulled this old man down, and we threw this thing against." Nobody's taking any pictures.
Yeah.
I asked the detective, "Did you go to the hospital, or did you?" No, just a little bruise here, broke my glasses. Do you have a picture of the glasses? No. The trooper had pictures of his car. Because some state police agencies, you can't have a scratch on the car. They get like
Yeah.
about 12 of the car. No pictures of the guy, no
Yeah.
pictures of the puke,
Yeah.
narrative, So I can remember when I went to that state police barracks the first time, those guys looked at me. Once I started telling them what I found, then the whole story loosened up. I ended up teaching a little block on that. Man, you got to document this.
Yeah.
you get a bruise, have it in a report. Take a picture, a little scratch on your face, because it shows the story. We didn't have
Yeah.
cameras these days. And then, like I said, the citizens across the street, if that had been in Houston where I worked, they would have had a whole different story. But you can just go boys in the bar and they're like, yeah, he came out with a swing, fell on his face, put the window out. Yeah.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right.
So by working in that prison, I learned a lot about how to talk to people and these things together. That was pretty. And I worked terrorism stuff in Washington.
Yeah.
The squad I was on was the first squad that started doing the international terrorism. And that was, they were a
Well,
difficult environment when you're trying to apply. If you're gonna bring a guy to face justice in America, you have to be careful because other countries and their cultures treat criminals a little differently than we do. You gotta kind of work it so it's right for us. It's
yeah.
challenging at times.
All right. John Hearn sent me a message, said that you taught at the Gunsite 499 class that had both Tom Givens and Jim Higginbotham as students.
That may be true. I don't know if they
Okay.
were students were,
All right.
there was some knowledgeable shooters that came through Gunsite, people that were winning trophies and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The names didn't come to mind to me at that time. But,
Okay.
he probably knew that. I mean, I got invited into one of his classes. He does an excellent job his teaching. And one of the other guys in the class who's now passed away, he was a big Gunsite guy. And he knew me. We were sitting in the class, and he the guy told her, and he said, "When I need to know something, I call this guy." I mean, me. So I might be one of the furthest back persons with Jeff. I've actually got a picture here, a couple of pictures of me with Jeff. One meeting him to the draw that somebody took.
There
Uh,
you go.
he
Well,
had a gong. He had a gong at his 25-yard range there at 50. And so what he liked to do is challenge you to 10 shots with it. If you could hit the gong 10 out of 10 times. If you got up around 8, he would turn his head. He probably can't get
any other good stories of the personalities from that Gunsight era that you'd like to share?
um, no, we were pretty busy there teaching. Jeff was, like I said, he was a taskmaster and absolutely convinced that he knew. He wasn't an easy guy to argue with or to come up with an idea. He had his own ideas and they're right. But he treated us well, and I enjoyed it. For me, it was a vacation. I got to shoot guns and be out with a bunch of nice people away from the police, for a week. Came home with money, so my wife was happy. You Not really. I mean, Jeff. I tell you, one day, so we were running these students through the student house, and we had a stairwell that went up to a roof. And on the roof, he had three 5-gallon drums, and behind the drums was a pop-up target. So the instructor could pull a cord and pull this display of 2 or 3 targets and then just drop it. So I had this guy going through with me, and he shot at him. Then he ran up to the targets laying flat on the roof and shot him again. Shot holes in the roof. So when we got done, I said, "How come?" And it turns out he was a European. And he had lived through the Nazi era. He just you know, it got into him that he had to make sure they were dead, even though they were cardboard targets. Jeff was not happy to have holes in his roof, by the way. He was pretty upset about that. He's like, why did you let him do that? I said, I didn't know what he was doing. He just ran up to the targets and shot them before I could say anything.
The fact that he did it didn't mean I let him do it. Yeah, that's the
No, but I
yeah,
also kind of understood why he did it.
yeah.
I understood his thinking behind that. And uh, those were fun days for me. Where you're out there with Ken Hackathon sometimes, somebody that you also read about. It was fun. I learned a lot. When I went there the first time, I brought two 1911s with me. By Wednesday, I was shooting Colonel Cooper's gun because those guns, as they came from the factory, just don't hold up firing 200 and 300 rounds in a very time. This is, and there were Colts. I had Smith and Wesson sights put on them, the handgun sights back in the day. They just flipped right off there after a couple of days. No sights. And, so Jeff just gave me his pistol.
There you go.
And conversely, he comes the first time he came to Houston. I picked him up at a hotel and we had breakfast, take him to the range. We get to the range and he just sticks his hand up. He needed a firearm. He didn't say he needed a firearm. So here I am. I gave him my pistol. I'm theoretically supposed to carry a firearm anytime I'm inside Houston, by the way. Now Jeff's got it. So from thereafter, I realized I better bring an extra pistol because he's not flying.
There you go.
Yeah,
Uh, anything about firearms training that you would like to talk about that I haven't asked you about?
yeah. I think students, you need to focus on accuracy. Of course, you got to learn how to safely manipulate a handgun, and then safely manipulate a handgun under stress before you start carrying it forward. And I think you need to seek out training beyond basic marksmanship. You need to seek out training. John Murphy is very good. I took one of his classes. I used to go all the time to Jeff Rogers, before he died, and seek out instructors who are going to teach you a little bit beyond just the basics of drawing and firing and so on. I mean, really, you can make the argument, yeah, you might have to take a 25-yard shot, but 15 yards and in is probably pretty good. Most situations that people are going to get in. And if you can develop a reasonable amount of accuracy and skill with that, you don't need a 1 second draw, but you got to know when to draw. It's an issue of timing, not time. Look at all these scenarios on the internet on that active self-protection. That's what you're going to come up with. You're more likely to have your left arm full of groceries or your wife or girlfriend. Well, you're going to have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think force on force training using airsoft is good. I use that as a police chief in the schools because you don't damage anything and you just use a vacuum to clean it up. And those things are okay for across a small room. But learning to shoot, when to shoot, when not to shoot, what to say, is really as important as marksmanship. And there's not enough of that. So, most people sign up for class. It's like, oh, this guy was a Delta Force guy, so you know they want that experience instead of looking for somebody who can teach
Uh,
you. Like Masada, like you go to a class of his, he knows what he's talking about in terms
yeah.
of liability and
I think I'm going to name this episode "Timing, Not Time." I think that was a gold line,
yeah, yeah.
gold nugget line right there.
Well, that's important. I mean, the thing is, I look at. I never really worked in plain clothes as a police officer, but then when I became an agent, you're basically a detective.
Yeah.
Oh, you're going in places, and the guns not under a under a code. You didn't really train that way.
Yeah.
They do now. The new FBI firearms qualification courses. You have to be. It goes from undercover. Everything's concealed. But uh, I think a couple times back when I first started, bulletproof vests were kept locked up in this gun vault. I'm going to get in the gun vault at 3 o'clock in the morning. You call in to go make a request. And then you get them, you're trying to put them on. Now everybody has them.
Yeah.
So, things have gotten a whole lot better, I think, but they could be better. I don't think it's that. I think it's in the long run, it's cheaper to do a little more training for these officers, in service training, with scenario-based training or shooting and moving. Did you ever shoot and move in the academy? Did you ever?
Um, I think we did some straightforward and some straight backing up,
Yeah,
but I know
yeah,
the current curriculum, we have range week, and it's all about just getting qualified with the pistol,
yeah,
qualified in quotes. And then there are three so-called advanced pistol days, and in those there's some shooting on the move and the like. And then there's a week of officer survival, which may be some range work, which may be some scenarios. Um,
yeah.
they get an active shooter or active killer response class. A lot of sim gun work,
Yeah.
moving and shooting.
Um, I think a lot about here you are, you go through this training, but nobody's trained you to move.
Mhm.
You're in a situation, you realize, man, here's a good situation. Our class training officer out of the FBI, this guy from the field, he's our counselor, stays with us through the whole thing. He was excellent. So he was an agent in Detroit, Michigan. And Friday afternoon, another agent asked him to accompany him to the interview. There were two guys at the interview. And usually, when you're interviewing a potential suspect, you want to have a second guy there to help you write, and then you got two names on the investigation. So this is winter. So the officer said, "Yeah, I'll go." So he puts his coat on, puts his jacket on, puts a coat on, and they go to a upscale neighborhood, knock on the door, and the guy opens the door with an M1 rifle. And my counselor's saying to himself, "I got to unbutton my coat. I got to get under my, you know." And as soon as this guy came to the door, he butt stroked the other agent in the head and knocked him unconscious. So our counselor grabs the rifle, and they have a fight over the rifle, and Chuck won the fight, and butt stroked the guy unconscious. Thereafter, 5 shot goes in the pocket front. You don't really think of a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why I think citizens like Gunsite, they've got a shoot house there. You can have no shoot targets in it. That is a really big learning point, I think,
Yeah.
for
A guy
people.
being a guy being on the other side of the door holding a rifle and he butt strokes your partner in the head is a much different start signal than a standby beep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Then it's a Friday afternoon, and you're going
Yeah.
into a wealthy neighborhood, so you're
Mhm.
not thinking thugs
No.
either. And this guy was not, unbeknownst to us, at the time, this guy was really deeply involved in this criminal activity. He thought that he was being arrested.
Yeah.
And the agents thought, we're just going to interview the guy. So it's dangerous. It's like the Miami shootout changed a lot of things.
Mhm.
I Ed when Ed was in Washington, we were on the same squad, and he's a dear friend. Biggest change is the adoption of a semi-automatic weapon, which everybody was hollering for, and management. Not I'm not just the FBI, but in general, was slow to move on that, and so that. But the big change was in ballistics.
Mhm.
Nobody was really testing ammunition, so someone at the academy came up with the idea we need a ballistics lab. So they put together a lab there and a protocol with different things, which I think were reasonable. Shooting ballistic gelatin with bear gelatin with a shirt, then with like a winter jacket, um, shooting gelatin at an angle, car angle of the glass, seeing what happens, and doing it all in a humidified, like the same standards, low humidity lab, same distances, everything. And once began to see that ammunition wasn't what people were touting it. And so then manufacturers began to make it better. And that's why I think the 9mm has now shown to perform as well as a 45. Argument will always be there, but our ammunition works better. And so it came from that. And police departments can send 100 rounds there, and the rest are not tested for. That was a big change, and that changed the semi-automatic pistols, and training got better after that shootout. Gordon McNeil, who was the supervisor that got shot in the hand, he was one of my former bosses. He remembers trying to manipulate that pistol with his hand torn up and whistle in the pieces of him inside the cylinder too, and to reload and shoot. So that went a long way to changing, making big changes. And I think the Bureau, to its credit, I'm sure you've seen the video. There was obvious things could have been done better. They didn't really try to cover it up. Although what I think is missing in some of that is that was a Friday in Miami, and the squad routinely went out and sat on banks. So Eddie and his partner and the other guys, they were driving to wherever they were going to set up, and all of a sudden there's the car. So that uh, what do you do now? And then you can see the guys can see that they see you or you're there, so you got to do something. It was
Yeah.
a tough game, and it was a hard experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen Ed's presentation on that, and I interviewed him on this show. Uh, and just it's that incident, as you're saying, just so much stuff came out of that.
Yeah, yeah, and I just saw him on the 29th. We just put the wreath on a former teammate's. A former teammate of ours who was killed in May 29th, 1995. When they apprehended that. So members of the SWAT team and all these guys that we came out, we put a wreath on his grave.
Okay.
I haven't seen Ed in a while, and yeah, he's a good guy. He was a good guy. He was a good guy to work with on the squad. He was
Yeah, he's a funny guy too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, he was a class counselor. He was a staff counselor at the academy, and they brought me in as a field counselor for that class. We, we had a lot of fun with that class. With Eddie, with his reputation and what happened to him.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah,
Mm.
he's doing well, done well for himself. And one time I saw his arm, and he was still about maybe a year out of that thing, and it looked really still looked really pretty bad. He needs more operations on it.
Mm.
Yeah, he gave a presentation in Washington to the Secret Service. And he threw his arm up, you can see what happened. Really, I think around there.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've been going probably an hour and a half now.
Yeah, yeah,
And so, sir, I've really enjoyed the conversation.
yeah. Same here.
Fascinating career. Thank you for all of your services.
You know
Uh,
what? When I retired, this is the truth. I didn't have 5 bad days in the FBI. I can't answer for what has gone on with President Trump. I'm long, it's long out, but
uh,
worked with some terrific people. Most of the people I worked with would lay down their life for it, as did this agent Bill Clifton. He was on leave, didn't come to work. He was flying to Europe. He knew the squad was trying to arrest somebody, was trying to kill him, but he went to work. That's. I have his picture on my desk. I remind myself. He was a hard working, great guy, and he just wouldn't let everybody down. Like, if he had not gone to work and someone got shot there, he'd have blamed himself. That kind of guy. And it's good we remember. Yeah, I've enjoyed talking to you. Every time you need something, just call. I'm here.
yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate you taking your time out this evening to do the show, and to the audience. I know that you're
Not a
most
problem.
important. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, not a problem. I want you to know my wife made me change shirts because she saw a spot on the other one and she said, you can't be doing it with that. So,
Well, you got to do what she says.
yeah, well, that's the secret.
There you go. All right. Well, again, thank you for your time, and to the audience, thank you for your time, because we know that your most important asset is your time. Thank you for choosing to
Yeah.
spend it with us.